Welcome back to Tina Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finish, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing. Leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance, and settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. I learned early that the best way to survive was to become nothing. Not invisible, no. That would imply I was something first, something that could fade. I mean nothing. A shadow that scrubbed floors, a pair of hands that existed only when they were useful, a heartbeat that knew how to go quiet when footsteps approached. My name is Ara, and for 17 years, I perfected the art of disappearing while standing right in front of people. Every morning started the same way, 4:30, before the sun even thought about rising, before the pack house stirred with the sounds of wolves who mattered. I'd be on my knees in the great hall, fingers raw and burning from the lye soap, scrubbing stone floors that had been walked on by boots worth more than my entire existence. My knees ached a deep, bone-tired ache that settled into the marrow and never really left. My stomach would cramp with hunger because Omega servants ate last, and there was rarely anything left by the time we were allowed near the kitchens. But I learned not to complain. Complaints required a voice, and voices required being noticed. And being noticed as an Omega meant one of two things: more work or worse attention. Neither was good. So I became an expert at silence. If silence were a skill you could rank like tracking or fighting or all those things that made wolves valuable, I'd be alpha level. Honestly, I could probably teach a masterclass, how to exist without actually existing 101. Step 1, keep your eyes down. Step 2, make yourself small. Step 3, never, ever let them see that you're hoping for something more. Because hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. Hope made you think that maybe, just maybe, you could be something other than the girl who scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots and pretended not to hear when the pack wolves talked about you like you weren't even there. The Omega with the brown hair? Which one? They all look the same. And they were right, weren't they? We did all look the same. Same rough-spun dresses, same downcast eyes, same invisible existence. But here's the thing about being invisible: you see everything. You hear everything. You become this silent observer of a world that thinks you don't have eyes or ears or thoughts of your own. And in that world, in the grand Silver Moon pack house with its marble columns and crystal chandeliers and tapestries that cost more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes, there was one person impossible not to notice. The Alpha King, Cale Thorne. Even his name felt dangerous in my mouth, so I never said it out loud. But I thought it. God help me. I thought it more than I should. He wasn't like the other alphas, the ones who strutted around with their chests puffed out, who made sure everyone knew exactly how powerful they were, how many enemies they'd killed, how many women had warmed their beds. No. Cale Thorne didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His power was the kind that made the air change when he entered a room. It was in the way other alphas grown men who could tear through enemies without breaking a sweat straightened their spines when he passed. It was in the way the entire pack house seemed to hold its breath when he spoke. I'd been working in the pack house since I was 12, and I'd seen him 1,000 times, maybe more, always from a distance. Always while I was on my knees scrubbing something or carrying something or being so utterly nothing that his gaze would slide right past me. And I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it was better this way. Kings didn't notice girls like me, and that was fine, perfect even, because being noticed by someone like him would only lead to heartbreak, and I'd had enough of that to last several lifetimes. But there was this thing that happened whenever he was near. This stupid, treacherous thing my body did without my permission. My heart would speed up. My skin would prickle with awareness. The air would feel charged, electric, like right before a storm breaks open the sky, and I'd find myself stealing glances, even though I knew I shouldn't, even though I knew it was pointless and dangerous and so incredibly stupid. It wasn't attraction. I told myself it wasn't attraction, it was just awareness, the way prey becomes aware of a predator, natural, instinctive, nothing more. Except sometimes when I'd catch a glimpse of him in the Great Hall, addressing the pack or meeting with his council, I'd see something beyond the power and the danger. There'd be this flash of something in his dark eyes, something tired and lonely and almost human. And for just a second, I'd forget that he was the Alpha King and I was nothing, and I'd wonder what it would be like to be seen by someone like him, not as an Omega, not as a servant, just seen. But those thoughts were dangerous, so I'd shove them down deep, bury them under layers of stone and silence and survival, and get back to scrubbing. Because girls like me didn't get fairy tales. We got calloused hands and empty stomachs, and if we were lucky, we got to survive another day without being noticed by the wrong person. I thought I had it figured out. I thought I knew the rules. Keep your head down, do your work, don't make waves, don't hope for anything, and maybe you'd make it to tomorrow. But then everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays meant cleaning the main corridor, the one that connected the Alpha King's private wing to the rest of the pack house. It was a nervous kind of job because important wolves used that corridor, and if you were in the way when they came through, you'd better move fast. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain, probably wine from the previous night's dinner, when I heard the footsteps. Multiple sets. Heavy boots, the kind of purposeful stride that meant alphas were coming, and coming fast. I did what I always did, pressed myself against the wall, made myself small, kept my eyes on the floor. The stone was cool against my palms. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my breathing quiet even. They passed in a blur of leather and muscle, and that particular scent, that powerful wolves carried pine and smoke and dominance. I didn't look up. I never looked up. But then they stopped. I felt it before I heard it, that shift in the air, that sudden tension that made my wolf stir for the first time in hours. She was weak, my wolf, undernourished and beaten down by years of suppression, but even she recognized danger. Watch your tongue, Marcus. The voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath that control was something razor-sharp and absolutely lethal. I knew that voice. Of course I knew that voice. It was the one that lived in the corners of my mind, the one I heard in my dreams and tried desperately to forget when I woke. Cale Thorne, the Alpha King, and he was standing less than 10 feet away from me. I was just saying, my lord, that Omega servants have become careless lately, perhaps stricter discipline. Perhaps, Cale interrupted, and his voice dropped even lower, which somehow made it more terrifying. You should concern yourself with matters that actually require your attention. The Omegas serve this pack faithfully. They deserve respect, not your commentary. Silence, heavy and suffocating. I kept my eyes locked on the floor, on the bucket of dirty water beside me, on anything except the scene playing out above my head. But my entire body was tense, coiled tight with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else. Something that made my chest ache and my throat tight. Protected. I felt protected, which was insane, which was dangerous, which was something I needed to stop feeling immediately because Alpha Kings didn't protect Omega servants. They barely acknowledged our existence. Of course, my lord. My apologies. The footsteps retreated. The corridor returned to its normal sounds, distant conversations, the clatter from the kitchens, the soft whistle of wind through the stone archways. But one set of footsteps didn't move. I could feel him there, could feel his presence like heat against my skin. My wolf whimpered, confused and overwhelmed. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my head down, to stay invisible, to not do anything that would draw his attention. But something made me look up. Just a glance, just a flicker of my eyes in his direction. And he was looking right at me, not past me, not through me, at me. His eyes were darker than I'd realized, almost black in the shadowed corridor. and they held something I couldn't decipher, something intense and searching, and entirely too focused for comfort. Time stopped. Or maybe my heart stopped. I couldn't tell the difference. He didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge me beyond that look, but it lasted longer than necessary, longer than any alpha had ever looked at me, long enough that heat flooded my face and my stomach twisted with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into nothing. I sat there, frozen, my hands still pressed against the cool stone, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. What just happened? I replayed it in my mind. The way he'd defended us. The way he'd looked at me. That split second of connection that felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. And then I did what I always did when feelings threatened to surface. I shoved them down. I locked them away. I reminded myself of the brutal truth. Kings don't notice girls like me. Not really. Not in any way that matters. It was a fluke, a moment of passing curiosity, nothing more. I went back to scrubbing, but my hands were shaking, and the stone floor blurred in front of my eyes, and somewhere deep in my chest, in that place I'd learned to keep silent and still, something stirred, something that felt terrifyingly like hope. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of work and deliberate forgetting. I scrubbed harder, kept my head lower, moved faster through corridors where he might appear, because that look, that single searing moment of connection had cracked something open inside me that I couldn't afford to have broken. Hope was a luxury. Hope got you hurt. But the pack house was buzzing with different energy now, a current of excitement that thrummed through the stone walls and animated conversations in every corner. Even the other Omegas whispered about it when the higher-ranking wolves weren't around. The blood moon ceremony. It happened once every decade, when the moon turned crimson in the sky and the ancient magic that bound our kind grew strongest. It was a night of power and tradition, when the Alpha King would choose his mate before the entire pack, cementing alliances and securing the future of our bloodline. And everyone knew who he would choose. Lady Seraphina Silvercrest. I'd seen her, of course. You couldn't work in the pack house and not see her. She glided through the halls like she was born to them, which I supposed she was. Daughter of the Northern Alpha, trained from birth to be a queen. She had that effortless grace that came from never doubting your place in the world, never wondering if you deserved to take up space. She was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, tall and willowy, with silver blonde hair that caught the light like spun moonbeams and eyes the color of winter ice. Her skin was flawless porcelain, unmarred by the burns and scars that decorated my hands. When she laughed, it sounded like music. When she walked, wolves male and female alike stopped to watch. She was perfect. Everything an Alpha King's mate should be. Everything I would never be. The ceremony was set for the next evening, and I spent the entire day preparing the great hall with the other Omega servants. We draped silk the color of blood across the ancient stone pillars. We arranged white roses, hundreds of them in crystal vases that probably cost more than I'd earn in my lifetime. We polished silver until it gleamed, lit candles until the entire hall glowed with warm, flickering light. It was beautiful, achingly beautiful. The kind of beauty that belonged in fairy tales, in stories about true love and destiny and happily ever after. And I wouldn't be allowed inside to see it. Omega servants weren't permitted at ceremonies like this. We were allowed to prepare, to create the magic, but not to witness it. We'd spend the evening in the servants' quarters, listening to the distant sounds of celebration, imagining what it must be like to belong to that world instead of just serving it. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it was better this way. Watching Cale Thorne claim Lady Seraphina as his mate would only reinforce what I already knew. That moment in the corridor meant nothing. That I meant nothing. But as I adjusted the final spray of roses near the dais where they would stand, where he would pledge himself to her forever, something twisted, sharp, and vicious in my gut. Jealousy. Not the righteous kind. Not the kind you could justify or explain away. This was the ugly, self-directed kind that made me hate myself even as I felt it. Because what right did I have to be jealous? What claim did I have on a man who'd looked at me once, briefly, in a shadowed corridor? None. I had no right to any of this feeling. Of course he would choose her. I whispered to the empty hall, my voice barely audible even to myself. She's everything. You're nothing. Remember? I tried to picture it, him standing beside her, his hand in hers, his eyes soft with something that looked like love. The image made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to hold it, to really see it, because maybe if I imagined it enough, if I prepared myself properly, it wouldn't hurt so much when it actually happened. And then, because I was apparently a glutton for punishment, I let myself imagine something different, something impossible. Me standing beside him, me in silk instead of rough-spun cotton, me with my hand in his eyes looking at me with something other than distant politeness. The pack watching us, accepting us, seeing me as something other than the invisible girl who scrubbed their floors. The laugh that escaped my throat was bitter and sharp. Fairy tales aren't for girls like you, Ara, I told myself firmly, gathering up the empty vases and discarded ribbon. Stop it. But my treacherous heart didn't listen. The next evening arrived with an atmosphere thick enough to choke on. The entire pack house thrummed with anticipation. I could hear it in the hurried footsteps of nobles arriving from distant territories, in the excited chatter that echoed through the corridors, in the very air itself that seemed charged with ancient magic. The blood moon was rising. I'd been dismissed to the servants' quarters along with the other Omegas, told to stay there until the ceremony concluded. We sat on our thin mattresses, listening to the distant sounds of the celebration beginning. Music drifted down from the great hall, haunting and beautiful, played on instruments I'd never learned the names of. My roommate, Lissa, sighed dreamily. I bet Lady Seraphina looks like a goddess. Probably, I murmured, staring at the rough ceiling above my bed. She always does. Do you think the Alpha King is happy? Another girl asked. He always seems so serious. I thought about that, about the few times I'd seen him with Lady Seraphina, the way they'd stood together during pack meetings. He'd been polite, respectful, but there was something missing, something I couldn't quite name. He didn't look at her the way the romance story said mates should look at each other. There was no softening in his eyes, no warmth that made the air shimmer between them. Not like that moment in the corridor. I shoved the thought away before it could take root. I'm sure he's fine, I said, my voice carefully neutral. It's a good match. Strategic. But is it love? Lissa pressed, her romantic nature getting the better of her. Before I could answer, before I could figure out what to answer, the world exploded. Not literally, but it felt like it. A roar tore through the night, so massive and terrible that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the pack house. It wasn't human. It wasn't wolf. It was something ancient and furious and utterly terrifying, a sound that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the primal part of the brain that understood predator and prey. Fenrir. The name whispered through my mind, even as every Omega in the room scrambled to their feet, eyes wide with terror. Fenrir, the rogue alpha who'd been terrorizing the borderlands for months. Fenrir, who commanded a pack of outcasts and criminals and bloodthirsty wolves who followed no law but his own. Fenrir, who'd sworn vengeance against the Silver Moon Pack for some ancient slight I didn't understand. And he was here. Now. During the blood moon ceremony, when our strongest wolves would be gathered in the great hall, when our defenses would be focused inward rather than outward. Another roar split the night, closer this time, followed by screams and the distinctive clash of combat, the sounds of war. Fear rippled through the pack house like a living thing. I could feel it, that collective terror that came from knowing we were under attack, that death had come to our doorstep, but underneath the fear, something else stirred. Something I didn't understand. A pull, a tug, like invisible strings attached to my sternum, drawing me forward, upward, toward the chaos instead of away from it. My wolf surged to life for the first time in days, pacing and restless inside my skin. Go, she seemed to say. Move, now. We need to hide, Lissa gasped, grabbing my arm. We need to get to the cellars. But I wasn't listening. I was already moving toward the door, my body acting on instinct, on that strange pull I couldn't explain. Era! Lissa called after me, her voice high with panic. Where are you going? I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain that something was calling me, that every cell in my body was screaming at me to get upstairs, to get to the great hall, to get to... His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The Alpha King's command voice, amplified by the power that ran through his bloodline, echoing through every corridor and chamber of the pack house. All civilians to the safe rooms, warriors to the perimeter. Now, the command hit like a physical force, that alpha compulsion that made your body want to obey before your mind even processed the words. Every Omega around me immediately turned toward the cellars, their feet moving without conscious thought. But I stood frozen, because that pull, that invisible string, it didn't lead to safety. It led up. It led to him. I should have obeyed, should have gone to the cellars like every other Omega, should have hidden in the dark until the danger passed. That was survival. That was smart. But my feet were already moving in the wrong direction. Through the servants' corridors, up the hidden stairs that led to the main levels, toward the sounds of battle and terror, and that voice that made my entire body vibrate with recognition. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to turn back, to not be so catastrophically stupid. But that pull was stronger than reason, stronger than fear, stronger than the instinct for self-preservation that had kept me alive for 17 years. The main corridor was chaos. Nobles fleeing, warriors rushing toward the sounds of combat, the metallic scent of blood already thick in the air. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way, trying to understand what I was doing here, what insanity had possessed me. And then I saw him. Cale Thorne stood in the center of the chaos like the eye of a storm, his power radiating outward in waves that made the air shimmer. He was partially shifted, his eyes glowing amber, his canines extended, every line of his body coiled and ready for violence. He was terrifying, magnificent, absolutely lethal. And he was looking for something. His head turned, scanning the fleeing crowd with an intensity that made my breath catch. Warriors reported to him in rapid succession attack from the north, breach in the east wall, Fenrir's forces pushing toward the ceremonial hall, but his attention seemed split, divided, like he was searching for someone specific. Our eyes met across the chaos, and the world stopped. That pull, that inexplicable, impossible pull, it snapped taut between us like a cord drawn to breaking point. His eyes widened, amber bleeding into black, his entire body going utterly still despite the battle raging around him. Even in chaos, even with death and danger pressing in from all sides, my body reacted to his presence like gravity, like the tide responding to the moon, like something fundamental and undeniable and completely beyond my control. His lips moved, forming a single word I couldn't hear over the noise. But I didn't need to hear it. I felt it in my bones, in my blood, in every fiber of my being. Mine. The world didn't just stop. It shattered. Because that word mine, it wasn't just a thought. It was a brand, a claim, a truth that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my place in this world. And the worst part? Some deep, primal part of me recognized it, responded to it, screamed yes even as my rational mind tried desperately to deny what was happening. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Alpha Kings didn't mate with Omega servants. The Moon Goddess didn't make mistakes that cruel, that impossible. But the bond, because that's what this was, that's what I could feel snapping into place between us, like a lock finding its key. The bond didn't care about logic or hierarchy or all the reasons this was wrong. It just was. Cale's expression shifted from shock to something darker, something almost desperate. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run to him, to close the distance, to touch him and confirm what my heart already knew. But then another roar split the night. Closer, so much closer. The great doors to the ceremonial hall exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Wood splintered, stone cracked, and through the destruction walked something out of nightmares. Fenrir. I'd heard stories about him. We all had. The rogue alpha who'd grown too powerful, too wild, who'd rejected pack law and civilization, and everything that made us more than beasts. They said he was 8 feet tall. They said he bathed in the blood of his enemies. They said he couldn't be killed. Looking at him now, I believed every word. He was massive, more creature than man, caught in a permanent state between human and wolf that shouldn't have been possible. His body was covered in scars that told stories of 100 battles survived. His eyes glowed red, not amber like a normal alpha's shift, but red, like fresh blood, like hellfire. And he radiated power, not the controlled, civilized power of an alpha king, but something raw and primal and absolutely terrifying. The kind of power that made your wolf want to bare its throat in submission or run until your legs gave out. Every warrior in the corridor froze. Not out of cowardice, but out of pure instinctive response to a predator at the top of the food chain. KL shifted fully, his body expanding, bones cracking and reforming, until he stood between Fenrir and the rest of us in his full alpha form. Massive, powerful, every inch the king he was born to be. "You dare," he snarled, his voice barely recognizable through the shift. "Attack my pack during a sacred ceremony?" Fenrir's laugh was like gravel scraping against bone. "Your pack." He prowled forward, each step deliberate, measured. "Your ceremony, your rules." He spat the last word like it tasted foul. "I came to deliver a message, King. To remind you that not all wolves bow to your crown." The warriors tensed, ready to strike at their alpha's command. The air crackled with violence waiting to erupt. This was it, the moment that would end in bloodshed and death, and war that would consume us all. But then something impossible happened. Fenrir's red eyes swept across the corridor, taking in the assembled wolves, the destruction, the Alpha King standing proud and defiant before him. His gaze was dismissive, almost bored, like he'd seen it all before and found it wanting. And then those blood-red eyes found me. The world tilted. I was pressed against the wall, trying to make myself invisible out of sheer habit, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I was nothing, nobody, just an Omega servant who'd been stupid enough to disobey orders and end up in the middle of a war zone. But Fenrir looked at me like I was the only person in the room. His entire demeanor changed. The predatory prowl stopped. The casual violence that radiated from him like heat flickered and dimmed. His red eyes widened, and something that looked almost like recognition flashed across his scarred face. "You," he breathed, and the word carried wonder and confusion, and something that sounded dangerously close to reverence. My knees went weak. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from the sheer weight of his attention, his focus, his sudden and complete fixation. He moved toward me. Not aggressive, not threatening, almost careful. "Stay back." Kale's command cracked through the air like a whip, and I felt it in my bones, that alpha voice that demanded obedience from every wolf within hearing range. But Fenrir didn't even acknowledge him, didn't break his stride, didn't take his eyes off me for even a second. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there frozen as this nightmare-made flesh crossed the corridor toward me, warriors parting before him like water, too shocked or too terrified to intervene. I heard Kale snarl, felt the surge of his power as he prepared to attack, to put himself between me and this threat. But Fenrir was faster. He stopped 3 feet away from me. And then, as the entire pack watched in absolute stunned silence, Fenrir the rogue alpha, the war beast, the monster who answered to no one, dropped to his knees. His head bowed, not in submission, in recognition. "Likaina," he whispered, and the word was old tongue, ancient and powerful. "She, wolf of prophecy, Luna of the forgotten bloodline." His voice cracked with emotion I didn't understand, couldn't process. "I've been searching for you." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody seemed to even breathe. Because this was impossible. This violated every law of pack hierarchy, every understanding of how our world worked. Rogue alphas didn't kneel, war beasts didn't show deference, and they certainly didn't kneel before Omega servants. But here he was, on his knees, before me. "Traitor!" The shout came from somewhere in the crowd of warriors. "She's with him. The Omega is a spy. She brought him here. Treachery! She's betrayed the pack." The accusations flew like arrows, each one hitting its mark, making me flinch. Faces I'd served for years twisted with anger and betrayal. Wolves who'd barely acknowledged my existence now looked at me with hatred in their eyes. And I wanted to deny it. Wanted to scream that I had nothing to do with this, that I didn't know Fenrir, that I'd never betrayed anyone. But my voice was trapped in my throat, frozen by shock and terror and the impossible situation I'd found myself in. "Enough." Kale's voice cut through the chaos, and this time it carried the full weight of his alpha command. The kind of voice that made bones vibrate and wolves drop to their knees in submission. He moved with fluid grace, placing himself between me and Fenrir, between me and the angry crowd, his body a shield that I didn't understand, didn't deserve. "The girl has done nothing wrong," he said, each word sharp and clear. "She will not be accused without proof." "But my lord," one of the warriors protested. He kneeled to her. I saw what happened. Kale's eyes flashed amber, and the warrior fell silent. "And I will get answers. But there will be no mob justice in my pack. Am I understood?" Reluctant murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Fenrir rose to his feet slowly, his red eyes never leaving me, that strange reverence still written across his scarred features. "You don't understand what she is, King. You can't see it yet, but you will." He smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "The prophecy has begun. The true Luna rises. And your ordered world?" He gestured at the destruction around us. "It's about to burn." Before anyone could react, before the warriors could attack or Kyle could respond, Fenrir shifted a blur of fur and muscle and impossible speed and disappeared back through the shattered doors, his howl echoing through the night like a promise of chaos to come. The silence he left behind was deafening. I stood there, trembling, my back pressed against the stone wall, while the entire pack stared at me like I'd grown a second head. The accusation in their eyes was clear. "What are you?" And I didn't have an answer. Because I didn't know. I was just Ara, just the invisible girl who scrubbed floors. I wasn't special. I wasn't prophesied. I was nothing. Wasn't I? "Clear the corridor," Kale commanded, his voice tight with control that felt like it might snap at any moment. "Get the civilians to safety. Secure the perimeter. Move, now." The warriors scattered, some reluctantly, some with relief at having clear orders to follow. The nobles who'd been caught in the chaos fled toward their chambers. Within moments, the corridor was empty, except for a handful of Kale's most trusted guards. And me, still frozen against the wall, my heart racing, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't begin to answer. Kale turned to face me, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. He was still partially shifted, his eyes glowing amber, his power radiating outward in waves that made the air shimmer. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful, dangerous, in complete control, but his hands were shaking. Just slightly, just enough that I could see it. He took a step closer, then stopped, like he was fighting some internal battle. His eyes raked over me, checking for injuries, for blood, for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" His voice was lower now, softer, meant only for me. And there was something in it, concern, confusion, something else I couldn't name that made my chest ache. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Did he touch you?" Another step closer. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, like he was restraining himself from... What? I didn't know. "No," I managed, the word barely a whisper. "He just... knelt. I don't understand why. I don't know him. I've never... I know." Kale's jaw tightened. "I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you," they hit me harder than any of Fenrir's roars. Because he had no reason to believe me. Because every shred of evidence pointed to some connection between me and the rogue Alpha. Because defending an Omega servant against the suspicions of his entire pack was political suicide. But he believed me anyway. His hand lifted, reaching toward me, and I watched it move like everything was happening in slow motion. His fingers extended, trembling slightly, moving toward my face, toward the strand of hair that had come loose from my braid during the chaos. The air between us crackled with electricity. That bond, that impossible, undeniable bond pulled taut, begging to be acknowledged, to be touched, to be real. Our eyes met, and I saw my own confusion and wonder and terror reflected in his amber gaze. His fingers were an inch from my cheek, half an inch, close enough that I could feel the heat of his skin, could smell his scent, pine and smoke, and something uniquely him could imagine what it would feel like when we finally touched, when that bond snapped fully into place. And then he pulled back, fast, abrupt, like he'd touched fire. His hand clenched into a fist at his side, and something that looked like pain flashed across his face before he locked it down, buried it beneath layers of alpha control. "I need you to go to your quarters," he said, his voice carefully neutral now, emotionless. The voice of a king giving orders to a servant. "Stay there. Don't speak to anyone about what happened. I'll send guards to ensure your safety." "But that's an order, Aura." He knew my name. Somehow, he knew my name. And the way he said it, rough and desperate and like it cost him something, made my heart stutter in my chest. "Go," he said, softer this time. And I heard the plea underneath the command. "Please." So I went. I walked on trembling legs back through the corridors, past the destruction and the blood and the evidence of a world that had just tilted on its axis. Back to the servants' quarters, where the other Omegas huddled in terror, where I belonged, where I was safe. But safety felt like a lie now, because something had changed, something fundamental and irreversible. And as I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the chaos slowly settling around me, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. His hand almost touching mine, the electricity between us, the way he'd looked at me like I was something precious, something worth protecting, the way he'd pulled back like touching me would destroy us both. What are we? I wondered, staring at the ceiling, feeling that bond pulse in my chest like a second heartbeat. And what happens now? I didn't sleep. How could I? When every nerve ending in my body was on fire, when that bond hummed in my chest like a living thing, when my wolf, my weak, beaten down wolf paced restlessly beneath my skin for the first time in years. The servants' quarters were quiet except for the soft breathing of the other Omegas, all of them mercifully unconscious after the terror of the evening. But I lay there in the darkness, replaying everything over and over until I thought I might go mad. Fenrir kneeling. The prophecy. Kale's hand trembling as he reached for me, then pulled away. That word mine that still echoed in my bones. What am I? The question circled endlessly, unanswered, maddening. I must have dozed eventually, because I woke to rough hands shaking my shoulders and a voice hissing urgently in my ear. "Get up, now." My eyes snapped open to find a warrior looming over my bed, one of the king's personal guard, his expression grim in the pre-dawn darkness. Terror spiked through me. "What?" "The Alpha King has summoned you. You're to come immediately." The other Omegas were stirring now, watching with wide, frightened eyes as I stumbled out of bed, still wearing yesterday's work dress, my hair a tangled mess. The warrior's grip on my arm was firm but not painful, as he led me out of the quarters and through the still dark corridors. "Am I in trouble?" I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. He didn't answer, which was answer enough, but he didn't take me to the throne room or the council chambers where I'd expected. Instead, he led me deep into the heart of the pack house, down stone stairs I'd never been allowed to descend, into passages lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on walls covered in ancient symbols I didn't recognize. The air grew thick with power, old power, the kind that predated the pack house, predated the Silver Moon pack itself, magic that made my skin prickle and my wolf surge toward consciousness. We stopped before massive doors carved with runes that seemed to pulse with their own light. "Inside," the warrior said, and there was something in his voice, not quite pity, not quite awe. "The ritual chamber." My heart stuttered. Ritual? But he was already walking away, leaving me alone before those doors that seemed to breathe with ancient magic. I stood there, frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where would I go? And hadn't I learned by now that running from impossible things didn't make them less real? I pushed the doors open. The chamber beyond stole my breath. It was circular, carved entirely from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Symbols covered every surface, the floor, the walls, the vaulted ceiling high above, and in the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood but knew, somehow, that it was. Kael stood beside the altar, no longer in his ceremonial clothes but dressed simply in dark combat gear that emphasized the lethal grace of his body. His eyes found mine the instant I entered, and the impact of his gaze hit me like a physical force. The bond pulled. Gods, how it pulled. But he wasn't alone. An elderly woman stood on the other side of the altar, her silver hair hanging to her waist, her eyes milk-white with blindness or power. I recognized her from the few times I'd glimpsed her in the pack house, the seer. The one who read the old magic, who spoke prophecies that alphas paid fortunes to hear. "Approach, child," she said, and her voice was like wind through ancient trees. "Your blood calls to be remembered." I looked at Kael, questions in my eyes, but his expression was unreadable, carefully controlled in that way that meant he was feeling too much. "Ara." My name in his mouth still did things to me I didn't understand. "Last night, Fenrir called you Lycana, Luna of the Forgotten Bloodline." He paused, jaw tight. "I brought you here because the seer believes. She believes he might be right." "I don't understand," I whispered. "I'm nobody. I'm just—" "You are Omega," the seer interrupted, "because your bloodline chose to hide, chose to sleep rather than be destroyed in the purges 300 years ago." Her blind eyes somehow found mine. "But sleep is not death, child, and blood remembers what the mind forgets." She gestured to the altar. "Come, let us wake what has been sleeping." Every rational part of my brain screamed warnings. But that pull, that bond, that instinct, that something urged me forward. I crossed the chamber on trembling legs and stood before the altar. The seer took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and turned my palm upward. From her robes she drew a blade that looked older than time itself, its edge gleaming with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "This will hurt," she said simply. "Pain is the price of awakening." She drew the blade across my palm before I could prepare, and white-hot agony lanced through me. Blood welled too dark, too bright, the wrong color somehow, and dripped onto the altar's ancient stains. The symbols on the walls flared to life. Power surged through the chamber like a tidal wave, and I gasped, my knees buckling. But Kael was there, his hands catching my shoulders, holding me upright even though I saw him flinch when we touched, saw the bond flare between us like lightning. "Stay with me," he growled, and the alpha command in his voice gave me something to anchor to as the world tilted and spun. My blood hit the altar and sang. That's the only word for it. It sang with power and recognition and something ancient waking from centuries of sleep. The symbols blazed brighter, burning themselves into my vision even when I closed my eyes. Magic poured through me, not gentle, not kind, but raw and primal and absolutely merciless. My wolf surged forward, but she wasn't weak anymore, wasn't beaten down or suppressed or small. She was massive, powerful. Something that had been compressed and restrained and held back my entire life suddenly given room to breathe, to grow, to become what she was always meant to be. I screamed, not from pain, though there was pain. God's was their pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming sensation of becoming more, of feeling power flood through channels that had been sealed shut, of understanding clicking into place like puzzle pieces I'd never known were scattered. My bones didn't break, they reformed. My muscles didn't tear, they strengthened. And my skin began to glow with symbols that matched the ones on the walls, ancient runes that marked me as something other, something powerful, something that had been hidden for 3 centuries. The shift took me without warning, but it wasn't like the shifts I'd seen before. This was something older, more complete. My wolf burst forth in a surge of silver light, and I felt armor forming not metal but crystallized moonlight, ancient magic made solid, covering my body in plates that sang with power. When I came back to myself, I was on my hands and knees on the stone floor, breathing hard, every nerve ending alive with sensation. But I was changed. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, in the way power hummed just beneath my skin. I wasn't weak anymore, wasn't small or invisible or nothing. I was Lycaina, whatever the hell that meant. I raised my head, and my eyes met Kale's. He stood frozen, staring at me like I'd rewritten his entire understanding of the world. His amber eyes were wide, his lips parted slightly, his entire body tense with something between awe and hunger and fear. The armor, because that's what it was. I could see it now covering my arms, my torso, gleaming silver plates that seemed to exist between solid and light, reflected his stunned expression back at me. Impossible, he breathed. The armor of the ancient Lunas. It's been lost for 300 years, the seer finished, and there was satisfaction in her voice. Since the purges when the old bloodlines were hunted and destroyed. But this one, she gestured at me, this one survived, hidden, waiting. I pushed myself to my feet, and the armor moved with me like a second skin. It didn't weigh me down. If anything, I felt lighter, stronger, like I could take on the world and win. Kale's eyes tracked my movement, and I saw something shift in his expression. The way he'd looked at me before with that alpha dominance, that automatic assumption of hierarchy, it was gone, replaced with something softer, something that looked dangerously like respect. He didn't bow. An alpha king never bowed, but his eyes acknowledged me as an equal. Ara, he said, and my name in his mouth carried weight it never had before. I need to. He stopped, started again. May I touch you? The question stunned me more than everything else combined. Alpha kings didn't ask permission. They took, they commanded, they expected obedience. But he stood there, this powerful male who could dominate any wolf with a word, asking for consent to touch me like I was something precious, something that might shatter. The bond between us thrummed, begging to be acknowledged. I held out my hand. His eyes darkened. He took a step forward, then another, moving with predatory grace until he stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Could smell his scent, pine and smoke, and alpha male mixed now with something else, something that called to my newly awakened wolf. Mate, she whispered. Ours. His hand rose, trembling slightly, and his fingers touched my palm. The world exploded. Power surged between us like a completed circuit, like lightning finding ground. The bond that had been hovering between acknowledgement and reality snapped into place with such force that I gasped, stumbling forward into his chest. His arms came around me instantly, catching me, holding me, and everywhere we touched felt like fire and ice and right, in a way that defied explanation. The mate bond. It wasn't gentle, wasn't subtle. It was overwhelming and all-consuming and absolutely undeniable, flooding through me with certainty that rewrote everything. Mine, it sang in my blood. Mine, mine, mine. And from Kale, a growl low and possessive and completely beyond his control. The kind of growl that said mine and protect and claim all at once. His whole body went rigid, fighting for control, fighting against the instinct to complete the bond right here, right now, consequences be damned. But I wasn't some submissive omega anymore. Wasn't the girl who cowered and kept her eyes down and accepted whatever fate handed her. I was Lycaina. Whatever that meant, however impossible it seemed. So instead of dropping my gaze, instead of baring my throat in submission, I looked up and met his eyes directly. So, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. This is awkward. For a moment he just stared at me, his expression frozen between shock and desire and alpha instinct. And then God's help me, he smiled. Not the controlled, political smile I'd seen him use with nobles and visiting alphas. A real smile, genuine and stunned and completely undone, crinkling the corners of his eyes and transforming his entire face from intimidating king to something almost boyish. Awkward, he repeated, and his voice was rough with barely controlled emotion. That's not the word I would have chosen. What word would you have chosen? His smile widened, even as his arms tightened around me, even as that possessive growl rumbled through his chest again. Impossible, miraculous, terrifying. He paused, his eyes searching mine. Perfect. My breath caught. I've never, he continued softly, met anyone who talks to me like that, who looks at me like I'm just a man and not a king. You are just a man, I said, even though we both knew it was a lie. Even though power radiated from him in waves, even though the mate bond sang between us with recognition of what he was, alpha, king, dominant male, a man who's holding me a little too tight. He loosened his grip immediately, but didn't let go entirely, like he couldn't bear to stop touching me now that we'd started. The bond, he said, and there was wonder in his voice. I felt it yesterday, in the corridor, but I thought I told myself I was imagining it because you're... He stopped. Omega, I finished. Nobody. Nothing. No. The word came out sharp, commanding, and his hand cupped my face, tilting it up so I had to meet his eyes. Never say that again. Never think it. You are... He stopped, struggled for words. You're my mate, my equal, and I don't understand how or why the goddess chose us. But I know it's real. His thumb brushed across my cheek, and the gentleness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. I feel you in my bones, Ara, in my blood, like you've always been there and I just couldn't see you until now. The seer cleared her throat, reminding us she was still in the room. The bond is true, she confirmed. Rare, ancient, the kind that only forms between equals of great power. Her blind eyes seemed to see right through us, the kind that can change the fate of kingdoms, or destroy them, Kale murmured, and some of the wonder in his expression faded, replaced by grim reality. The pack will never accept this. An Alpha King mated to an Omega, a former servant, it violates every tradition, every law of hierarchy. I'm not Omega anymore, I said, and heard the power in my own voice for the first time, felt the truth of it. The blood ritual changed me, woke what was sleeping. You were never just Omega, the seer said. You were hidden Luna. Now you are revealed. She moved toward the door, her message apparently delivered. But the path ahead will not be easy. Fenrir knows what you are. Others will learn, and those who profit from the old order will fight to destroy you. She paused at the threshold, her blind eyes somehow meeting mine. The prophecy speaks of the Luna who will unite what was broken, who will stand between the old world and the new. But prophecies are not guarantees, child. They are possibilities. What you become depends on the choices you make. Then she was gone, leaving us alone in the ritual chamber with a bond neither of us had asked for, and a future that suddenly seemed both miraculous and impossible. Kale's hand was still on my face, his touch gentle despite the hunger I could see in his eyes, the possessive need that the bond amplified to almost painful levels. What do we do? I whispered. His smile was crooked, tired, but genuine. Honestly, I have no idea. This isn't covered in any of the king manuals. He brushed a strand of hair back from my face. But I know what I want to do. What's that? Kiss you. The admission was rough, honest. I want to kiss you until we both forget that this is impossible, that the entire pack will revolt, that I should send you away for your own safety. His forehead dropped to rest against mine. Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I'm not going insane. You're not going insane, I breathed. I feel it. God help me, I feel everything. And I did. The bond, the pull, the desperate need to close that final distance between us and let the mating complete itself. Every nerve ending screamed for his touch, for his claim, for the connection that would make this real beyond any doubt. But we stood there, trembling, on the edge of a precipice neither of us was quite ready to jump from, because once we did, there would be no going back. And the world we knew, his world of tradition and hierarchy, my world of survival and invisibility, would burn. The bond hummed between us, alive and demanding, and for one perfect moment the world narrowed to just the two of us standing in that ancient chamber, his forehead against mine, his breath mixing with mine, the promise of a kiss that would change everything hanging in the air like a spell waiting to be spoken. But reality has a way of shattering perfect moments. The door burst open with a crash that made us spring apart, and a warrior stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash across his temple. "My lord," he gasped, dropping to one knee. "Fenrir's forces, they've returned. Larger numbers. They're demanding." He stopped, his eyes finding me, widening with recognition. "They're demanding the girl." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kyle went utterly still beside me, and I felt his power surge outward in a wave that made the warrior flinch. When he spoke, his voice was soft, deadly soft, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "Repeat that." "Fenrir sent a messenger under parley flag, my lord. He says he'll withdraw his forces and leave the Silver Moon Pack in peace if we—" The warrior swallowed hard. "If we surrender the Lycaina to him. He claims she belongs to the old bloodlines, not to any modern pack. He's given us until dawn to decide." My stomach dropped. I looked at the small window high in the chamber wall and saw the first hints of gray light creeping across the sky. Dawn was less than an hour away. "How many warriors does he have?" Kale's voice remained eerily calm, but I could feel the fury rolling off him in waves through our bond. "At least 200, my lord. Maybe more. They've surrounded the pack house on 3 sides. 200. Against our forces, already depleted from last night's attack. The math was brutal and simple. And they wanted me. "Leave us," Kale commanded, and the warrior scrambled to obey, probably grateful to escape the killing rage that filled the chamber. The door closed behind him, and silence fell like a blade. I could feel Kale thinking, could almost see the calculations running through his mind. 200 warriors, his pack's safety, the lives that would be lost in a battle we might not win, all weighed against me. A girl who'd been nothing yesterday, who was something today, but what? An awakened Luna of a dead bloodline? A prophecy that might be real or might be ancient nonsense? A mate bond that shouldn't exist? The logical choice was obvious. "I'll go," I said quietly, and felt him go rigid beside me. "If it stops the bloodshed." "No." The word cracked through the air like a whip, and he turned to face me fully. His eyes had bled to pure alpha amber, and the power radiating from him made the air shimmer. "Absolutely not. Not happening. Not even a consideration. But your pack will not purchase peace by selling my mate to a rogue alpha." His hands gripped my shoulders, not painful but firm, demanding I listen. "Do you understand what Fenrir is, Ara? He's not some misunderstood rebel. He's a monster. He's killed hundreds. He bathes in blood and chaos, and he enjoys it." His voice dropped to something raw and desperate. "I won't let him have you. I won't let him touch you. People will die," I said, and my voice broke on the words. "Your people, warriors who have families, children, and they knew the risk when they swore their oaths." He pulled me closer, his forehead dropping to touch mine again, his breath ragged. "I know this sounds cruel. I know I'm supposed to put the pack above everything, but I can't give you up, Era. Even if I wanted to, and I don't. God help me, I don't. The bond won't let me. Every instinct I have is screaming to protect you, to keep you safe, to destroy anything that threatens you." "I'm not a possession," I said, and felt anger spark to life in my chest. "I'm not some prize to be fought over." His eyes met mine, and I saw him fighting for control. "I know that. Do you? Because it sounds like you're making decisions for me. It sounds like you're treating me exactly like every other alpha has my entire life, like I don't get a say. Like I'm something to be protected and controlled and kept in a cage for my own good. That's not—" He stopped, released my shoulders, took a step back. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. Alpha instinct versus mate bond, versus the recognition that I was right, that treating me like property was exactly what he'd accused others of doing. "You're right," he said finally, and the admission cost him. "You're absolutely right. I'm sorry." He dragged a hand through his hair, frustration and fear and fury warring in his expression. "But Ara, you have to understand the thought of Fenrir getting his hands on you, of what he might do." His voice cracked. "It makes me want to burn the world down." "Then let me fight," I said, and felt the armor still covering my skin pulse with agreement. "Let me stand beside you instead of behind you. Let me choose for myself." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his eyes. The possessive alpha dominance faded, replaced by something deeper, something that looked like wonder and respect, and maybe even the beginning of understanding. "You're terrifying," he said softly. "You know that? Good. You should be terrified of me." I stepped closer, close enough that the bond sparked between us again. "I'm not asking permission, Kale. I'm telling you how this is going to work. I'm going to fight. I'm going to stand beside you. And you're going to trust me to make my own choices, even when they scare you." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth despite everything. Most mates would just defer to their alpha. Most alphas aren't mated to a girl who's spent her entire life being told what to do. I smiled back, feeling the power humming in my blood, the certainty of who I was becoming. Get used to disappointment. He laughed, actually laughed, the sound rough and surprised and genuine. "I think," he said, reaching up to cup my face again, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "That's the moment I truly fell for you. Not when the bond snapped into place, not when you awakened, but right now, when you stood up to me and refused to be caged." "Good." I covered his hand with mine, feeling the rightness of the connection even as dawn crept closer and war waited outside. "Because I'm not going anywhere. Not with Fenrir. Not away from danger. I'm staying right here and we're going to face this together." "Together," he repeated, like the word was a promise, like it meant everything. The door burst open again, and this time it was his beta Marcus, the wolf who'd insulted servants in the corridor days ago. His expression was grim. "My lord, they're advancing. We're out of time." Kale's hand dropped from my face, and I watched him transform from mate to king in a heartbeat. His spine straightened, his expression hardened. Power rolled off him in waves that made Marcus drop his eyes in submission. "Prepare the warriors," Kale commanded. "Full defensive positions, archers on the walls, protect the civilians at all costs." He paused and his eyes flicked to me. "And spread the word the girl fights with us. Anyone who questions her presence answers to me." Marcus's eyes widened, his gaze darting between us, clearly putting pieces together he didn't want to see. "My lord, the pack won't. The pack will follow orders or face challenge." Kale's voice dropped to pure alpha command. "Am I understood?" "Yes, Alpha." Marcus bowed and fled. We were alone again, but only for seconds. I could hear the pack house waking, warriors arming themselves, the controlled chaos of preparation for battle. "Can you fight?" Kale asked, and there was no condescension in the question, just genuine need to know what I was capable of. I looked down at the armor covering my body, felt the power thrumming through my veins, my wolf strong and awake and eager pacing beneath my skin. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never tried. But I think—" I met his eyes. "I think I was made for this." "Then let's find out." The battle started with a roar that shook the foundations of the pack house. Fenrir's forces crashed against our defenses like a tidal wave of fur and fury and bloodlust. The air filled with the sounds of combat snarls and screams, the clash of claws against claws, the wet sound of flesh tearing, and I was in the middle of it. The moment the first rogue wolf came at me, something inside me just knew. My body moved without thought, the armor responding to my instincts, amplifying my strength and speed beyond anything I'd imagined possible. My claws longer and sharper than any normal wolf's tore through flesh like paper. My movements were fluid, precise, deadly. I fought like I'd been doing it for centuries instead of minutes. and beside me, moving in perfect synchronization, was Kael. We didn't need words. The bond connected us in ways that went beyond speech, letting us coordinate movements, anticipate attacks, cover each other's blind spots. When he engaged 2 rogues on his right, I took the 3 coming from his left. When I got pressed back by a particularly large male, Kael was there before I could blink, his jaws closing on the rogue's throat. It was brutal, violent, absolutely terrifying, and somehow fighting beside him felt like the most natural thing in the world. I caught his eye across the chaos, and something passed between us: acknowledgement, trust, partnership, not alpha and omega, not king and servant, equals. A rogue broke through our line, heading straight for me with murder in his red eyes. I braced, ready to meet the attack, but Kael was faster. He threw himself between us, taking the hit meant for me, his body a shield even as his claws ripped the rogue apart. I had it. I growled at him, adrenaline and annoyance making my voice sharp. "I know," he growled back, blood speckling his face, his eyes wild with battle fury. "Can't help it. Mate instinct." 2 more rogues converged on him from behind, and I didn't think I just moved. My armor flared bright as I intercepted them, my claws finding throat and heart with precision I didn't know I possessed. They dropped at his feet, and I met his stunned gaze. "Mate instinct," I said with a sharp smile. "Works both ways." Something fierce and proud flashed in his eyes, but there was no time to explore it. The battle raged on around us, and we threw ourselves back into the chaos. Time became meaningless. There was only the next enemy, the next breath, the next moment of survival. My muscles burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop, because beside me, Kael fought with the fury of a king defending everything he loved, and I refused to be the weakness that got him killed. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours. It might have been minutes, but eventually, the tide turned. Fenrir's forces began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them, disappearing into the forest that surrounded the pack house. Their howls faded into the distance, taking the promise of violence with them. The sudden silence was almost deafening. I stood in the courtyard, breathing hard, covered in blood, most of it not mine, my armor still gleaming with power. Warriors surrounded us, staring with expressions that ranged from shock to awe to something that might have been fear, because I'd fought and survived, and proven I was something more than the servant girl they'd ignored for years. Kael turned to me, and I saw his eyes widen, saw him take in the blood covering my skin, the tears in my clothing, the exhaustion written in every line of my body. His hands reached for me, and they were shaking, actually shaking. "Ara." My name came out rough, desperate. His hands ran over my arms, my shoulders, my face, checking for wounds with a franticness that contrasted sharply with the controlled king I'd seen just moments ago. "Are you hurt? God, there's so much blood." "Not mine," I assured him, catching his hands in mine to stop their frantic movement. "Kael, I'm fine. It's not my blood." "You're sure?" His eyes searched mine, still wild with adrenaline and fear and something deeper. "You're absolutely sure?" "I'm sure." I squeezed his hands, feeling the tremor in them, understanding what it meant. The mate bond made him almost irrationally protective, made my safety matter more than his own, made the sight of me covered in blood trigger every instinct to shield and guard and defend. "You saved my life," he said quietly, and the vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. "Multiple times. You fought like your equal?" I supplied softly. "Like my salvation." His forehead dropped to rest against mine, his breath shuddering out. "I've never fought beside anyone like that. Never trusted anyone at my back the way I trusted you." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You were magnificent." Around us, I could feel the pack watching, could sense their shock and confusion and the beginning of understanding. Their alpha king, standing in the ruins of battle, holding an awakened Luna like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We won," I said, even though we both knew it was temporary. Fenrir hadn't been there. This was just a skirmish, a test of our defenses. We did. Kale pulled back slightly, his eyes meeting mine. Together, I echoed, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. Whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever battles, whatever impossible odds, we would face them side by side. Not as Alpha and Omega, not as king and servant, but as mates, as equals, as partners who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The aftermath of battle was always uglier than the fight itself. Bodies needed moving, wounds needed tending, families needed notifying that their sons, their daughters, their mates wouldn't be coming home. The pack house transformed from a place of war to a place of grief, and I moved through it all in a daze, helping where I could, my armor finally fading as exhaustion set in. But grief wasn't the only thing moving through the pack. Change was coming. I could feel it in the way warriors looked at me, not with the dismissive glances I'd endured my whole life, but with something closer to respect, or fear, maybe both. And 3 days after the battle, Kael called a full pack assembly. I stood in the great hall, the same hall I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees countless times, but now I stood on the dais beside the Alpha King. Not behind him, not below him, beside him. The entire pack had gathered, hundreds of wolves, from the highest-ranking nobles to the lowest Omegas, all staring up at us with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Lady Seraphina stood in the front row, her perfect face composed but her ice-blue eyes sharp with calculation. She'd said nothing about the broken engagement, about Kale claiming a servant as his mate instead of her, but her silence felt dangerous. This pack, Kale began, his voice carrying through the hall with alpha command, was built on traditions that have served us for centuries. Hierarchy, order, the belief that strength determines worth. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the assembled wolves. But traditions can become prisons, and some traditions deserve to die. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nervous energy crackled in the air. 3 nights ago, we were attacked by Fenrir's forces. They came for one reason: to claim the female standing beside me. His hand found mine, our fingers intertwining in front of the entire pack. They failed. And they failed because she fought. Because she proved herself stronger, braver, and more capable than half the warriors in this room. The murmurs grew louder. Some wolves shifted uncomfortably. Others, mostly Omegas I recognized from the servants' quarters, watched with wide, hopeful eyes. But more importantly, Kale continued, his voice hardening, they failed because our pack is stronger when we don't waste the potential of half our members. When we don't crush spirits that could soar. When we don't treat wolves as disposable, simply because they were born Omega. My lord, a noble called out one of the old guard, gray-haired in tradition, bound. You speak of changing laws that have existed for centuries, laws that maintain order and stability. Surely you don't mean to— I mean to restructure everything. I spoke before I could second-guess myself, before the old fear of making myself heard could silence me. My voice rang clear through the hall. Starting with Omega rights, shocked silence fell like a curtain. Every eye turned to me, some hostile, some confused, some god, some of the Omega servants looking at me like I'd just offered them salvation. Kale's hand squeezed mine in silent support, and I drew strength from the bond humming between us. For too long, I said, feeling power thread through my voice, not borrowed from Kale, but mine, awakened and undeniable. Omegas have been treated as lesser, as servants fit only for manual labor. We've been denied education, denied choice, denied the basic dignity every wolf deserves. I looked at the Omega servants huddled in the back, saw myself reflected in their faces. That ends now. This is madness, another noble protested. The hierarchy exists for a reason. Omegas lack the strength, the intelligence. I lack nothing. I cut him off, and let just enough of my power show enough that my armor flickered into visibility, enough that ancient magic shimmered in the air around me. I am Lycaina, Luna of the forgotten bloodline, and I will be heard. The hall went utterly silent. From this day forward, I continued, my voice steady despite my hammering heart, all Omegas in the Silver Moon Pack will have access to education, to training if they choose it, to positions based on merit, not birth. I looked at Kale, and he nodded, giving me silent permission to speak for both of us. No Omega will be forced into servitude. No Omega will be punished for speaking. No Omega will be treated as less than any other member of this pack. And anyone, Kale added, his voice dropping to something dangerous, who violates these new laws will answer to me personally. I don't care about your rank, your bloodline, or your traditions. Omegas are pack members, and they will be treated with respect. The nobles looked mutinous, the warriors looked uncertain, but the Omegas looked at us like we'd just rewritten their entire world, which, I supposed, we had. You ask us to overturn centuries of tradition, Lady Seraphina spoke for the first time, her voice cold and cutting, to elevate servants above their station, to place faith in wolves who have never proven themselves worthy of such trust. Her eyes found mine, all because the Alpha King's judgment has been compromised by a mate bond. The implication was clear, that Kale wasn't thinking straight, that I'd somehow bewitched him, that none of this was real or valid or anything more than mate bond madness. I felt Kale's anger spike through our connection, felt him ready to defend me with all the fury of an alpha protecting his mate. But I didn't need him to fight this battle. You're right, I said, and watched Seraphina's eyes widen slightly at the admission. I haven't proven myself by your standards. I haven't been trained in combat since childhood. I haven't studied politics or warfare or all the things noble daughters learn. I stepped forward, feeling the power humming beneath my skin. But I have learned things you never had to. I learned how to survive when everyone treated me like I was nothing. I learned how to read people, to understand what they wanted, to make myself invaluable in ways you'd never notice. I smiled, and it wasn't kind. Turns out, being underestimated is a weapon, and I've been sharpening it my entire life. A few surprised laughs rippled through the crowd, mostly from younger wolves, ones who might be tired of the old ways. These laws will stand, Kale said with finality, not because I'm compromised, not because I'm bewitched, but because they're right, because I've seen what we waste when we judge wolves by birth instead of character. His eyes swept the room. Anyone who cannot accept this is free to challenge me, formally, in the traditional way. Silence. Because challenging an Alpha King meant fighting to the death, and everyone in this room knew Kale was unbeatable in single combat. Then we're done here. Kale's voice softened slightly. The new laws will be posted by tomorrow. Pack dismissed. The crowd dispersed slowly, wolves breaking into clusters to whisper and argue and process what had just happened. But I caught sight of the Omega servants, saw the tears streaming down some of their faces, saw the hope burning in their eyes. One of them, Lissa, my old roommate, caught my gaze and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you," and something in my chest cracked open. Because this was worth it. Worth the impossible awakening, worth the danger, worth standing up here and being seen and judged and hated by half the pack. If it meant those girls would have choices I never had, it was worth everything. Kale's hand slid around my waist as the hall emptied, pulling me close. "You were incredible," he murmured against my ear, and I could hear the pride in his voice, the awe. "The way you stood up to Seraphina, the way you commanded the room." I was terrified, I admitted. I know, I could feel it through the bond. He turned me to face him, his eyes warm. "But you did it anyway. That's what makes you magnificent." I had help. I reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw. "You stood beside me, gave me the platform to speak, backed me up when I could have been dismissed. You think I had a choice?" He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "You're my mate, Ara. My equal. You think I could stand up there and speak for you, make decisions for you, like you were some accessory to my reign?" He shook his head. "You're not an accessory. You're the future." our future. And God help anyone who tries to stop you. The way he looked at me in that moment, not like I was something to possess or protect or keep safe, but like I was something powerful and fierce and unstoppable. It made my heart stutter in my chest. "Come with me," he said suddenly, taking my hand. "There's something I want to show you." He led me through the pack house, upstairs I'd never climbed, through corridors reserved for the Alpha's private quarters. Guards nodded as we passed, their expressions carefully neutral but their eyes curious. Finally, we emerged onto a balcony I'd only ever seen from below while I was scrubbing courtyard stones. The view stole my breath. The pack land stretched out below us, forest and meadow and mountains in the distance, all painted in the golden light of late afternoon. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, in a way I'd never been allowed to appreciate before because I'd been too busy surviving to look up. "I come here," Kale said softly, "when I need to remember why I do this, why I carry the weight of leadership, make the impossible choices, sacrifice personal happiness for the good of the pack." He turned to me, and vulnerability shone in his eyes. But lately, all I can think about is how empty it felt, how lonely, standing up here alone, looking out at everything I'm responsible for, and having no one to share it with. My throat tightened. "Kale, let me finish." He took my hands, his grip gentle but firm. 3 days ago, I almost lost you. When those rogues came at you, when I saw you surrounded, his voice cracked. I've never been so terrified in my life, and I realized something. His eyes met mine. I would burn this whole pack to the ground before I'd let anything happen to you. I would give up the crown, the power, everything if it meant keeping you safe. "That's the mate bond talking," I whispered, even though my heart was hammering. "No." He shook his head firmly. "It's not just the bond. It's you. The way you challenge me. The way you refuse to submit even when every instinct I have demands dominance. The way you look at me like I'm just a man, not a king, not an alpha, just me." He cupped my face in his hands. I was drowning in duty and tradition and loneliness. And then you, this impossible, magnificent woman, you showed up and reminded me what it means to actually live. Tears burned behind my eyes. I spent 17 years being invisible, being nothing, wanting so badly to be seen, to matter, to be something more than the girl who scrubbed your floors. A broken laugh escaped me. And then you looked at me, really looked at me, and everything changed. "Tell me," he said softly, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Tell me what you want, not what you think you should want, not what's practical or safe. What does Ara want?" The question hung between us, heavy and important and terrifying, because I knew the answer. Had known it since that moment in the corridor when his eyes found mine and the world tilted on its axis. "You," I whispered. "I want you. Not the Alpha King, not the crown or the power or any of it. Just you. The man who asked my permission before touching me, who looked at me with respect instead of dominance, who stood beside me instead of in front of me." My voice dropped. "I want to keep fighting beside you, keep challenging you, keep proving that I'm strong enough to be your equal." "You've already proven that," he said roughly. "God, Era, you've proven it 1,000 times over." "Then kiss me," I breathed. "Because I'm tired of almost moments and interrupted chances and all the reasons we shouldn't do this. Kiss me like I'm yours, like you're mine, like we're finally done fighting what we both know is inevitable." Something fierce and hungry flashed in his eyes. "If I kiss you now," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that made heat pool in my belly, "I won't stop. The bond will push for completion, for claiming, for making this permanent in every way." "Good," I said, and pulled him down to me. The kiss was everything. Soft and desperate and inevitable all at once. His lips found mine with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the hunger I could feel rolling off him in waves. And the bond god, the bond sang. Power surged between us, mate bond magic flaring bright and undeniable as our connection deepened, strengthened, became something permanent and unbreakable. His hand slid into my hair, tilting my head to deepen the kiss, and I pressed closer, needing to eliminate every inch of space between us. He tasted like smoke and pine and home, and I couldn't get enough. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the bond had settled. No longer pulling and demanding and incomplete, it was whole, solid, real. "Wow," I managed, and he laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made him look years younger. "Yeah," he agreed, his forehead resting against mine, his arms still wrapped around me like he couldn't bear to let go. Wow. We stood there as the sun set, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. God knew there was plenty of that still waiting for us. Fenrir was still out there. The pack was divided. Our future was uncertain at best. But standing there in Kale's arms, the mate bond humming contentedly between us, I felt like I'd finally found the place I was always meant to be. "I was once invisible," I said softly, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the mountains. "I learned how to be nothing, because I thought that was the only way to survive." "And now?" Kale prompted, his lips brushing my temple. I smiled. "Now I stand beside a king. Not behind him. Not beneath him. Not as some accessory or trophy or political necessity." I turned in his arms to face him fully. With him, as his equal, as his mate, as his partner. "As my salvation," he corrected softly, and the love in his eyes made my breath catch. "As the woman who changed everything." "We changed everything," I said. "Together." "Together," he echoed, and kissed me again as the stars began to appear overhead. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because whatever came next, whatever battles, whatever challenges, whatever impossible odds, we would face them side by side. Two wolves who found each other against all probability, who chose each other despite every reason not to, who proved that sometimes the most powerful bonds are the ones that break every rule. I was Ara, once nothing, now something, and I was finally home. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.